Let's make some cookies for Pride. This set consists of 4 beginner cookie decorations: a smiley face, a drag, a heart, and a icing transfer to put pride on a cookie. We start off by mixing all of our colors. This set, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, has 7 colors in it. And if you made the Pokemon set as part of May last month, you can use a lot of the colors from that set, which had 8, reuse them for the June Pride set. So we're starting off with white. Whenever I mix any of my colors, when I'm just mixing my icing, I always add white food coloring. I didn't used to do this. You'll have plenty of cookiers saying it's an unnecessary step, but the first full cookie intentional set I made for myself was for my 30th birthday, and half of the icing I added white to and the other half I didn't, and the ones I didn't have the white food coloring added into the icing of, I had butter bleed and they didn't look as good. So now I add it to everything. And yes, you do have to add a little bit more food coloring, particularly to reds or blacks, anything rich when you use a white base, but I think it also helps with color bleed because you just have additional pigments. Actually, would it be pigments? I don't know. This has been my experience. It's not necessary. So anywho, we're moving on to the white. All of the icings in this set, for the most part, all of the icings in any of my beginner sets are going to use what's called a hybrid icing consistency. This means it should be like flowing off your spatula, kind of like an Elmer's glue type of consistency. I'm not around Elmer's glue enough to really have a clear understanding of what that looks like. So a much better foolproof way of measuring if you are at the right consistency is running your spatula through it. Here you can see it's kind of running off. Is it running off enough? No. We're going to add a little bit more yellow. And I try and add the gel food coloring because it's a liquid before I add any additional water. Because if it's almost perfect, adding the gel food coloring might just add enough liquid to it to be perfect. So this is running off. I couldn't tell you if that's an Elmer's glue consistency, but what I can tell you is how I measure to have accurate consistency for these hybrid icings is to swipe my spatula through it like very cleanly, or a knife through it very cleanly, and count how long it takes for it to settle back into place. So not just for the two sides to touch in the middle, but to even out, because that's what we want this icing to do. We want it to even out like a traditional flood would, but it also needs to take a certain amount of time to get to that point. So I'm always looking for a 15 to 20 second evening out period, and you will literally run your spatula through it and then count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. And if you're doing something that includes a little bit more detail work, like this set with the Pride icing transfer, we do have a little bit more precision. So I would recommend a 20-second icing over a 15-second icing. Versus the Pokemon set, a 15-second icing kind of worked out just fine for that one. But a 20-second definitely would have been solid for things like the Pikachu face. So we're going through, we've made white, yellow, orange, making red right now. One of the tougher colors in this set, red's just a tougher color in general. So one of my tips to getting a really solid red, or anything that you want to be a darker, richer color, is to mix it, to add food coloring and mix it to the point where the color is no longer developing. So I might want this to be like a really dark, rich red. And a lot of cookiers will say, we'll cover it with a paper towel and come back to it in an hour or two. That's great advice for like a pro. I think it's pretty terrible advice for a beginner who is maybe just doing this one night in your dining room. You don't want to sit around for a couple of hours waiting for one color to develop. So I'll just add a little bit of food coloring at a time until it's not getting any redder. If you keep adding food coloring, expecting that color to change, I think I'm likely at the point where the color is not going to develop further. Exactly, hence why I moved on to the next one. If I kept adding red to be like, I just need it to be a little darker, just a little darker, what can happen is I can oversaturate that icing and it just won't set up the same. It won't dry. And I've had this happen a couple of times with red, particularly with black, where I've just added too much color and something in the chemistry of how everything works that was not my specialty means that it will never officially dry, and it kind of sucks. So I have found if you get it to the point where the color is not changing in the bowl, it will dry darker and it'll look great. And you'll see that in the cookies that we decorate here. I didn't need to keep adding red or even let it sit for a few hours because the red that I had was great. Another thing you might look at is I'm always using primary colors. So I'm using a red, I'm using yellow, I'm using blue. These are literally the names of the colors. I'm not using eggshell yellow and expecting to get a really, I don't even know if eggshell yellow is a color, but let's go with it. Let's say eggshell yellow is a color. I'm not using eggshell yellow and expecting it to be like a super vibrant daisy of a color, or I'm not using sky blue and expecting to get navy with it. We're going to get fairly explicit colors with this. And I bring it up because I have a friend whose red is not red, and we recently had a conversation about next time she makes cookies, she needs to go get red food coloring because her red is just a little off and she can never get it to look how she wants it to. So if you're doing the primary colors like I am, so you don't have a huge stock of gel food colorings for very specific icing colors, then get the very explicit, this is the color you're looking for colors. So blue, red, yellow. I don't think yellow repeats itself. I don't know why red does. Anywho, this purple is the only one that I found the most challenging, and I wish I had gone a little bit slower on because it's not that I added too much food coloring to it. It was just darker than I wanted it to be, and you'll see it get darker as it develops in the icing bag. It starts off kind of here, and it just gets darker and darker and darker. And it was intended to be like a violet. Yeah, you can see how well that went. But it's okay, because even though we're going with like the rainbow colors, we all have an understanding that it includes, I can't list all the colors, I'm really bad at naming the rainbow colors, but it includes a blue, it includes a purple, and it doesn't have to be super specific for you to understand what we're doing here. So now that we have all the colors, they're all bagged, we're going to cut the tips of our piping bags, and you're going to want to do this for all of your icing, obviously, but to start with your rainbow up until you get to purple, because we're going to do the icing transfers first. So what I like to do is cut a small bit of the end, turn it 90 degrees and cut again so I have a very straight line. And I always recommend starting smaller because you can always cut a bigger hole. If you want a smaller hole, you have to transfer it to a new piping bag, which I fought doing for a long time. So these are the icing transfers we're going to work with. We're going to do one letter at a time. Each letter is going to be a different color. So we're starting off with red, and this is a template you can find in the step-by-step guide down below. You can download it, print it off. If you had an iPad, you could technically put a piece of parchment paper on your iPad and just pipe onto that if you wanted to. I haven't done that. I feel like touching it would really screw things up, but do what you want to do. So you want to start off with the outline like every other thing we do when it comes to cookie decorating, and I recommend going slow so you can have very clear precision. And you see I'm going down. I know that it goes to a really sharp point. I can't get that precise with this piping bag. So I can always come back with my scribe later. And one thing I don't show here that I would actually recommend is outlining the P for all of the icing transfers you want to make. So I did 6. I would outline the P for each of them, and then I would come back and fill it in. And this just gives you a really solid edge for it to dry. And depending on your speed, you might want to do like 3. So one side of a sheet of paper and then the other side of the sheet of paper, because there's 6 on the template for you to print off. So that's an option for that. And then coming in and filling it in, just because it's spread a little bit more than I wanted to. It all worked out in the end. There's nothing wrong with it spreading a little bit, but if I had let it set up, if I'd let the icing outline set up just a little bit more by, doing 2 more P's or something, then it wouldn't have spread as much. You can see I kind of like lost the hole in the middle of my P. So I shake the parchment paper, which I didn't mind doing for this cookie, and then I came in with my scribe. So you can do one or the other. Honestly, just depends on what you prefer, and also the type of icing consistency that you ended up with. But I'm using my scribe to make sure that things are getting where I want them to be. And you can immediately move on to the next color. You don't have to wait for any of these to dry in order to be like, okay, well, the P's dry, now I can do the R. Nope, you don't need to do that. So the R I did all in orange. You obviously can change which colors you want where in this set for any of the letters, but this is the color pattern that I used. The other thing I would recommend is, instead of trying to outline the entire letter at one point, you can see the top of the R I just brought straight in, and it almost like cuts off the legs of the R. And that's okay, because whatever's the easiest way to get your icing to come out of the piping bag and have a very clean line is the best way to pipe. The other thing you might notice is that I moved the parchment paper over slightly, because the design is having the pride letters really close together. But since the icing spreads a little bit, I didn't want them to get stuck together because the icing spread out a little bit more than I wanted it to. So what I did was just scoot the parchment paper over just slightly. It's like a couple of millimeters, not very far, so there was additional space between the P and the R. And I continued doing this for all of the letters. And one of my pride icing transfers towards the bottom that I don't show, I ended up moving the parchment paper entirely, so there was like the D and the E underneath the PRI, just because I kind of ran out of space somehow. I don't really remember the circumstance, if I'm being honest, but you don't have to keep them in order. You could decide to do 6 P's all next to each other, and then 6 R's all next to each other, because you can move your parchment paper around. And you could even cut your parchment paper into smaller pieces so that it has just one pride on it, or all the different sections. So next up we have the eye. Thankfully, this is the easiest one to do because it's essentially like a rod. There is a little bit of, concave, where it stretches outward because this eye is in the middle of a circle cookie. And so you just want to make sure you're not doing a straight line, but a slightly curved line. And you can correct that with your scribe if you need to. So this one's yellow. You can see this yellow looks like highlighter yellow. It dried softer than this. I feel like I need to throw that out there. So I didn't super fill in because my yellow was a little thinner than my red and my orange, and I didn't want it to kind of blob out. So I come in with my scribe to push the middle section to the edge, and also just straighten up my corners and get the curves of that eye kind of spread out. You can also see how I scooted the parchment paper over again, so my eye is not so close to the R. Next up, we have the D. This was probably my second favorite letter to pipe because similar to the eye. It's a very simple letter and there's a lot to it. And this one is green. And I start off by doing the straight line up and then doing the curve of the D. And you can see my icing breaks every once in a while. Keep going. Keep decorating. You can always come and fill in those sections. And I also made the center of the D, the space, that hole in the middle, slightly larger than the image transfer. And you'll notice the image transfer that I have for you is slightly different from the font that I'm using here, because I went through and traced that font and just tried to correct some of those things that were a little hard about this image transfer so you don't have to deal with them. So the P has a slightly bigger hole in the middle, same with the R, same with the D. The R doesn't have quite as funky of a leg to it, those types of changes, so that it's hopefully easier for you to make these these icing transfers. And as I was going through them, I kept thinking, does this even look like the right letter? I had to ask my family and friends multiple times, like, does this look good? And everyone kept saying yes, they did. They knew exactly what it was. So trust the process. That's really what I'm saying. And just like I said with the P in the beginning, you might find it easiest, and this is what I truly did with all of the other letters in this set, was to outline them, outline the rest of them. So it's like outline the E and then do the rest of the E's and then come back and fill it in, so that I had a very strong edge of that letter. And it doesn't have to dry completely because we still want some movement with it. We still want it to blend in with the rest of the icing we put on top, but it just gets a little bit of that crust so it stays more in place. And I felt that was particularly important for the P and the E because the shape of those letters is so different than they normally would be because they're in a circle. So it's just a little bit harder to read them as being specific letters, just because of the shape they're in. After they have dried, which I found you gave them a couple hours, they would dry pretty quickly. I was pretty shocked by that. And some people you'll see using tweezers to move them. I found as soon as I moved the parchment paper at all, the icing transfers just came apart. And then what I did, I made more icing transfers than the cookies I was going to decorate. So I did 3 in this set for me, but I made 6 transfers. So I could pick out my favorite P's, my favorite R's, my favorite I's, D's, and E's, and organize them how I wanted them. So I wasn't stuck with, well, these are the only ones I have, so they have to be the ones I use. I could choose the ones that I felt looked the best. Now, to make the base of this pride cookie, you're going to take your white icing and outline your circle cookie. And you can, again, let that dry a little bit. You could outline all of the pride cookies you're going to make. A little confusing because this is a pride set, but there's a pride cookie in the set. So I'm specifically talking about the pride cookie, not the set as a whole. So you could outline all of your pride cookies and then come back and add in the I want to say filling, and that's just not right. Then you can fill in the center of your outline. And I like to leave a slight edge on the outside and push the icing to the outside. Another important thing to notice and realize is you are going to need more icing than you expect, particularly as a beginner, because you think, oh, I don't want to overdo it. You're likely not going to overdo it. You want a flat surface. So if you see the light reflecting in a weird wavy way, you probably need a little bit more icing, and you can see that evens out very nicely. So this cookie is crusted over, so it's a little bit more matte than it is glossy, as you can see from that original transition. And we're going to start transferring these icing transfers to the cookie. So I recommend starting with the eye because it is straight up in the middle and you can place that in the middle. I also recommend using tweezers because my hands were shaking. I do not have steady hands. The tweezers were far more helpful. you're going to put a little bit of icing on the back. You definitely don't want to overdo it. And I also recommended using white, the base of your cookie, so if any kind of seeps out, it's not going to stand out too much. And so after I placed the I went to the left and did the R and then the P. And then after I place that, I'm going to move over to the other side to do the D and the E. And you can put these really snug together or spread out a little bit. I probably could have moved the R slightly over from the I, but they all kind of work out. And you have a little bit of wiggle room once you place them to be able to move them because you have that fluid icing on the back of them. So we're placing the D. And I do believe I dropped this one because these are not tweezers. Yep, these are not tweezers I would recommend. They don't have a good grip and they're very, very pointy and I didn't want to poke my icing transfer. So I need to invest in tweezers. This is something I learned from the Pokemon set and once again on the Pride set. If we're doing image transfers, if we're doing icing transfers, I recommend tweezers. It just makes the job easier. But remember how I said the P and the E just felt like they weren't looking like those letters? When they all come together on this cookie, it looks great. It looks very professional and like it was difficult to do. But you can 100% make your own Pride cookie. For the smiley face cookie, we're going to be making kind of like a psychedelic wavy color pattern in the background. And the first step you're going to want to do is in this rainbow order. I already admitted I really don't know my rainbow colors or what order they're in. I don't know. Did I miss that day in elementary school? So you can just follow this or do them in whatever order you want. It does not matter. You're going to outline the sections and you can tell I'm not following any sort of template. I'm just like, let's make a wave. I guarantee you will probably make a better wave pattern than me if you've made or watched any of these cookie decorating videos where I talk about patterns. Patterns is not my specialty. And I've done wave cookies like this before and I'll look at others and I'm like, wow, theirs looks so much neater. The other thing I would say is remember you have 6 different colors you're putting onto this cookie. So you're just going to want to leave some space. This one I actually feel like I did a decent job of leaving space for the purple in the end. But there were other ones where I was like, oh, this is snug. If you get these outlines on and you're like, hey, I wish I had more of this color, you can scrape off this outline using a knife or a spatula. I have a really flat top spatula kind of for this reason and start over. No one's going to see what's underneath what you decorate on top. So you can start over. I'm giving you permission to. Once you have these outlines, you're going to come in, you're going to fill in the sections. So you're creating that outline and then you're coloring in the middle essentially. And for any of these tight edges, particularly on the red and the purple on the sides where it curves in, definitely use your scribe to push the icing where you want it to be. The other thing is I would recommend going against the color that's been filled in first to keep the line as nice looking as possible. And you can see I pressure piped that. So I pushed a lot of icing out of my piping bag to just have a thick line there. And I'm going to do it again with the future ones. So I will specifically point it out, coming back with the scribe to push it to that edge where I want it to be. So I always start, I'm going to say always, and then you're going to see me do one where I don't do this, where I'm pressure piping the icing directly against the one I just did. And this is just to keep the line the shape I want it to be. I have found if I try and push the icing there or do a really like faint outline, it looks wavy. I don't know. Maybe I should look into like the physics of that. I don't even know if that would be physics. Let me be 100% frugal right now. I was an English major, and while I enjoyed my science classes, I did not excel at my science classes. So I'm throwing things out from like 15, 18 years ago that I haven't studied since. So evening out the green here, and you can see everything's blending really nicely together. You don't really need to worry about making sure you have time in between each of these. We want this to be one flat surface in the end. So just like when you're putting the base on any other cookie, you want to make sure you're getting enough icing on the cookie. You can see there's a decent amount of icing coming out of my piping bag right now. And that thick amount of icing is going to help the entire cookie level off very well. And if there's a section where you're like, hey, I actually wish this curved a little bit more, just throw a little bit more icing there. It will level out, it will look good. So after you can see I just did that with the purple. I want a little bit more curve, so just threw on some more icing. It's gonna work out, it's gonna be fine. After you get this base on, you're gonna let that dry a little bit. You can see it went from real shiny to matte. So I would just move on, decorate the other cookies in this set, and then come back to add the faces on last. So this is where we're gonna pull the white. You're doing a really big curve for the smile. And I didn't try and pressure pipe to get like a thick smile line. I'm just gonna go over it one more time so that it's a little bit more, it's a little thicker, it stands out a little bit more. And then for the eyes, we want that oval shape. And again, just like when you're cutting the tip of your piping bag, you can always add more. You can't take away. So start small and keep adding more. And that's exactly what I do here, especially to even them out, because it can be hard to get them perfect from the get-go. But there's your smiley face. I call this the drag cookie, not because it has anything to do with drag that might be related to Pride Month, but because that's the method we're going to use on this cookie. So the first thing you want to do is outline the cookie using the white royal icing, and I like to do an outline that's like 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times around to create a very solid wall for my flood on the inside to not break through the wall essentially. And then I'm going to pipe in that middle section. I'm coloring in, I'm filling in, and you can see I'm not going all the way to the edge of that wall. I'm going to give that wall a little bit of time to set up itself, and I'm not going to put pressure on it by piping a whole bunch of icing against it. Now, there's just a little bit of time in between when I'm going to push that icing to the wall, but that's all the outline needs to be able to set up efficiently. So you're just letting it do that. So I go outside to in, you can go inside to out, it really doesn't matter. And then I add a little bit of icing around that edge just to make sure I have enough icing for this base of my cookie. I'm going to grab my scribe and I do these kind of circle motions to push the icing to the edge and then pull it back in. So I'm never trying to like force it to the edge and leave it there so that there's a little bit too much and it might break through. It's very common to have cookies overflow, which is also why I like to kind of drag it into the middle and then shake it so everything evens out. So unlike some of the other cookies in this Pride set, we're not going to want this to dry. We're immediately going to come in. You can see this cookie is still glossy, and we're going to add lines of our rainbow colors right on top of it. Again, we have 6 colors to add here, so you don't want to start with that red line right in the middle, although that would definitely look cute. Not saying you shouldn't do that. I also rebagged my orange, you can see here, because I didn't like the hole that I cut. So I put some in a smaller bag and I recut the tip of my piping bag. I did the same thing with the yellow. So we're just doing a straight line for each of these, and you can see I'm trying to go directly from one edge to the other. Another thing we could do here is start with the yellow and the green because they're the middle of our colored rainbow. And then you could work out from there if you're concerned that you're not going to space things well enough to kind of keep it in the center of the cookie. But with this drag method, it doesn't have to be center of the cookie. Nothing has to be super precise about this. Probably the most precise thing we're looking to do is just have some straight, clean lines. But even if they aren't that straight, even if they aren't that clean, they're still going to look cute because you're going to come in with your scribe. You're going to drag up. Make sure you're not going too deep into the icing. You don't want to be touching the cookie with your scribe because it'll get stuck. It'll drag on the cookie and it just isn't as smooth, and we're just going up and over. I'm usually someone who likes a very clean scribe and I clean it off, but we're keeping the pattern going with this one. And there you have the drag method cookie. Last but not least is the heart cookie. And this is the first time I've done this method before, but I was really looking forward to it. So we're going to start by pressure piping kind of just a blob of each of the colors. And again, we have 6 colors we're working with here, so you might want to be better than me and space them a little bit higher on the cookie, or start with that yellow or green in the middle, and then take a knife or a flat spatula, anything that can hit all of the colors at the same time, and spread it out. And I wish I had gone a little bit further over the very edge of the blob and spread it out, and then we're going to let that dry. So I would maybe do these first, set them aside, and come back to them when they've dried a little bit. And you're going to use your scribe, your toothpick, to carve a heart into these. And it doesn't have to be with them in the colors in a horizontal. You can do the heart at whatever angle makes sense for your colors. We're just really trying to get all of the rainbow into this direction. And as you're carving, just make sure as you move through the colors, you're wiping off your scribe so you're not getting the red into the purple or anything like that. And if you don't like how it's looking, here's what you can do. If you don't like it at all, scrape the icing off, start over. It's totally fine. But you can see this heart I wasn't super happy with, but I'm going to correct it with my white icing on top. So you're going to start by outlining the inside of your heart. The reason why you're doing the inside is because we don't want any of that extra kind of icing from scraggly edges of our icing when we dragged our scribe through it to be visible at the end of this. And you can see I wasn't even happy with how my heart looked to begin with, and now I have a weird like block top. How am I going to fix it? I'm just going to add a little blob there. It comes together. Just stay with me here. So then you're going to outline the edge of your cookie, just like we do with 2 of the other cookies in this set, but almost every single cookie we decorate together, we're always outlining that edge. And I'm going to go over it 2, maybe 3 times, so I have a really solid edge of this cookie. And you can do the same thing with the heart. And all you're doing is you're just creating that outline for you to not have your icing overflow into. So you can see I'm just going over the heart. It doesn't need to be a solid line. You can see my icing breaks, and I'm just making sure that I'm going over everything, and that when my icing breaks, I have that extra icing falling from my piping bag, that it's going into the section that's going to be covered by white anyways. And if you're confused by what I mean, everything between the outside edge to the edge of that heart is going to be filled with that white icing. And I'm getting to the end of my icing bag, and I'm really lucky it didn't explode over to my heart and ruin my cookie, but it didn't. It all worked out in the end, and I'm just making sure to really put the pressure in my palm instead of necessarily my fingers, except for at the very end when I'm using my fingertips. And it doesn't have to be as smooth as when we're filling in the rest of the cookie. We can have some empty spaces and use our scribe, especially at like the top of the heart where we have that little point. We can use our scribe to push the icing around for us and get it where it needs to be. And we can still make sure we shake our cookie and everything levels out very nicely, so that we have that rainbow heart on the inside popping out, but we have a very smooth outside white base. And just using the scribe to spread everything out, you can still see ridges and edges in there, and those are going to be corrected when I shake this cookie. And if you're at the point where you're like, I am not liking the shape of my heart, you can move your icing around to get the shape how you want it to look like. And also at the end of the day, it's a cookie. So if you really don't like it, just eat it and don't show it to anyone. That's totally fine. There's no right or wrong when it comes to cookie decorating. But everything evened out, it looked beautiful, and there is our heart cookie. And this is the 4 cookies you're left with in the end: the smiley face, the drag cookie, the heart cookie, and the pride cookie. I hope you have a fantastic pride and that you give these cookies a try. And if you do, please share them with me. I'd love to see it.